We got it wrong. The truth is, you can't spam and marketing automate your way into forcing people who are not in market to spend money. It's not the way, complex selling works.
Welcome back to the B2B Playbook, where we believe great go-to-market is about people, not platforms. That belief gets tested a lot in B2B. And while marketers are often blamed for underperforming go-to-market, they're usually operating with one hand tied behind their back, trapped by legacy sales structures, broken handoffs, and pressure to generate pipeline from people who aren't yet ready to buy. In this episode, Steve Patti, a 7-time CMO, 3-time sales leader, and architect of the Brand Demand Expand framework, joins us, along with Adem Manderovic, who's the creator of Closed Circuit Selling and co-founder of CRO School, to unpack why marketers feel so stuck in their go-to-market, how sales and marketing broke each other, and what it takes to rebuild go-to-market so it's commercially viable. We're going to look at how to escape the short-term traps, create a stronger system-level approach to trust, align with buyer timelines, and make sure our team is aligned too. Maybe a pretty big task for today, but Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here.
And Adam, as always, thank you so much for joining us too.
I'm just here to listen to more of Steve's brilliance. I was taken with a lot of those comments, outlining everything that you and I have been talking about heavily, at least the last 2 years. So I'm excited to dive into his experience with some of those structures and maybe get into why that's not highly prevalent as go-to-market knowledge mainstream. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Steve, on that, most people know you as a 7-time, CMO, 2 times founder, and I think a voice of reason in our LinkedIn bubble. But to Adam's point, you've also carried the bag in sales, Steve. How did that shape your view on what's broken in B2B go-to-market, and what really made you want to fix it?
Yeah, great question. I've been a big believer that the best marketing people have at some point in the first 5 to 7 years of their career, i.e. prior to the age of 30, worked in a quota-carrying sales role. And I think it does several things beyond just giving you perspective of walking in another man's shoes, because you could do that arguably just by listening to gong calls or sitting in on weekly win-loss analysis, sales ride-alongs, which I've done those even as a CMO as recently as, the last 5-10 years. I think the big thing that working in a quota-carrying sales role does is it gives you closer proximity to how buying really happens, so that you now can kind of smell the deception that modern marketers have been sold, where the answer to every sales problem or pipeline problem is a new piece of software. And so it has actually pushed the marketers away from buyers. They spend more time behind dashboards than talking to these supposed ICPs that they spend time defining. So this dissonance, this disconnect between marketing's fantasy view of how buying happens and sales frontline in the trenches view, because they live it every day and they have to hit quota, is one of the fundamental reasons why sales doesn't trust marketing. Full stop.
But Steve, just a quick question, because I unequivocally agree, but do you feel that the disconnect is also enhanced by the broken sales methodologies that have pushed the change in the measure, right? So if we wind back to pre-2008, the measure was open opportunity. It wasn't meeting set.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's start with that. So the baseline of how I answered the first question. The next question is, so what's the collateral damage perhaps that we've seen? And one of them is, Adam, as you're getting to, the goal line or the goal post has changed in terms of what the goals are of these two organizations. So marketing, buying into the Martech propaganda beginning kind of in 2007-8, reaching a crescendo about 10 years later, 17-18, prior to COVID, did a couple of things, right? They bought into the idea that buying behavior happens in some sort of linear funnel. They bought into the idea that if they buy enough software and spam enough people, they can load this funnel with so-called leads, And because they don't have sales experience, they don't actually know what a qualified lead is. Then they invent this thing called the MQL, the marketing qualified lead. Somebody that fills out a white paper or an ebook, downloads an ebook or whatever, which again is not buyer declared intent. It's fantasy intent. And then they pile this junk data on the sales organization, and marketing gets comped, or they make their numbers for these supposed leads. And then this SDR, and I always use SDR as inbound, BDR outbound, you know, your mileage may vary if you flip them. But the inbound sales screening role prior to AE gets invented because now they have an avalanche of junk they have to filter. And then the next outcropping from this is now we're going to set metrics on the ability to filter the junk and set the first meeting. It's a lot of wasted time, energy, technology spend, workflows and swim lane processes when we go back to, well, what is a qualified lead? It should be buyer declared intent. And what should we be comping marketing and sales on? It's what, in demand waterfall language, I would call a sales qualified, opportunity. If we can get unity there, it becomes real obvious to look at all the things from a time motion study both organizations are spending their time on, and how wasteful that is.
Given all of that, we now have a layer of C-suite, venture capital, marketers and sellers that have never seen outside of the broken sales methodologies and those measurements, right? Now, what that's done is also make sales believe that they're better equipped to handle those discussions. There's no top-down targeting from the organizational level. But then now we've got like this other layer from the LinkedIn crowd that have never been in either of the front end roles, chief marketing, head of sales, head of growth, that have come from sales ops that now have built this GTM engineer layer, fancy layer, this tech, where they don't actually know. It's like a layer of hypothetical maybes, and they're charging top dollar for it.
Yeah.
That's what I see the downstream commercial repercussion of that is. But we've also gone so far away when the short answer, as you and I both know, is sales goes back to market validations, which is basically cataloging the market, who's with who, what they like, what they don't, when would they be in market. That gives you right offer, right account, right decision maker, right channel, right timing. And that just then goes back to marketing, and marketing builds out actual proper marketing. But that doesn't happen because of those two things that have happened in terms of the measurement change, where we've washed out what the skill sets are. The skill set now is how fast can I pester people into taking meetings they don't want to take, or send them a voucher?
Yep.
And then how fast can I get out of that role to be in like a more of the half prospecting full cycle AE role, where I can just get paid top dollar to just sit on calls. It all comes back to the measurements, where nothing is looked at in terms of like commercial alignment, revenue alignment, architecture overarching. And then the other downstream repercussion of that is, there's a third point I should have said, the skill set from the AE into CS is only measured on like the success of getting the contract, not the fulfillment of the contract being serviceable. So let that resonate, crowd, because like what actually now happens is, as we know, you could just search CS reactivation requirements on LinkedIn, and everyone's talking about reactivation requirements because they don't know how to do a presentation day. They don't know how to do a live quoting session. They don't know how to lean into a commercial deal pack. They don't know what the communication plan is. We had some people come through some of our programs in discussions that were senior people, leaders in some of these areas, that had never seen a communication plan handover. Never.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack. So I'm going to try. I should have put a notepad.
Yeah.
So Adam, steer me if I
Bring your helmet.
Yeah, but I've got some specific thoughts about all of them. So yes, based on what I said 4 or 5 minutes ago, you've gone into more depth from the garden hose to the fire hose here on deeper organizational GTM issue. So I want to answer, or not answer, but kind of give my perspective on a couple. We need to be very careful to put too much faith in LinkedIn is an accurate proxy or indicator for the GTM failures across all B2B industries. Not only do I have an unfair advantage as a marketing leader because I started my career in sales, and what I didn't tell you, 100% commission with no draw. If I didn't close that month, I got evicted from my apartment, and the financing company came and repossessed my car because I couldn't make the car payment. So you want to talk about real ballsy sales? 100% commission, no draw, no ramp from month one. You hit your number or you starve. That is one of the many things that'll help you become a great qualifier quickly,
Yeah.
because you can get back a lot of things in life. You can't get back time. And every 10 minutes I spend with a tire kicker, as we would say, a suspect, and I'm not talking to a prospect, is time I can't get back in the month to make the number and pay the rent. Another story for another time, maybe over a beer. So let's come back to what I was saying about LinkedIn. The loudest voices on LinkedIn are SaaS. The loudest SaaS voices on LinkedIn are typically under 40 years old. So they got out of university in the mid 2000s and got dropped right into all of the false teaching, false doctrine, false nonsense. I'm over 50. And I've worked in 12 industries. So I can rightly read this stuff, know the motivations of why it's being written, kind of how they got as broken as they did, overcommitting. A lot of these software companies overcommit to their funding sources, whether it's VC or it's late, PE. Everybody in the organization then is doing random acts of selling with no unified commercial architecture. Everybody. Marketing, no, you're not a 4P function, you're a 1P function. And there's even debates, do we put SDRs in marketing and all that? Why would you ever have a sales professional reporting to an organization whose leadership have never sold anything in their lives? Okay, so how and why do we see all this stuff on LinkedIn? How and why do we read all these outlandish, incorrect descriptions or paraphrasing how buyer behavior works? Because this is a SaaS thing. I'm working in private equity right now. I've worked in high net worth, banking. I've worked in fintech. I've worked in automotive, in manufacturing. You don't have the same junior marketers putting this kind of stuff on LinkedIn. In fact, a lot of those industries or leaders are just reading LinkedIn. They're not creating any content at all. You know why? They're busy building world-class commercial go-to-market systems. So the first thing you have to do is recognize this is really a SaaS thing from younger, uneducated, highly academically educated, but school of life, having really led a proper best practice GTM function. They haven't. And I'm sorry, but even the things that Pavilion is doing, their CRO school and all that, I'm not going to be critical of Sam Jacobs. I think he's a smart guy. But again, it's an echo chamber. It's SaaS companies getting together and propagating mistruths, half-truths, and broken systems at scale. So you said about spamming and all of that in that whole thing. There's a Mark Twain quote, the famous US author that I love. And it says this, and I'll use it from time to time on LinkedIn. It's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. We have a lot of people with deep convictions, and because they believe so deeply about those convictions, they must be right, but they're wrong. And we're seeing this, if we want to go back to LinkedIn, with things like, why invest in brand? You know why? I can tell you, leading a sales team, brand matters. Because if I'm a sales guy sending an email to a prospect from a domain they've never heard of, it probably gets sent to trash. If I have to spend half my time in a LinkedIn outreach message or a live conversation explaining about the company you've never heard of and a category you've never heard of, you're screwed. Powerful, strong brands grease the skids to make selling easier. It's pretty unlikely the guys at Microsoft, Oracle, or AWS don't get callbacks. So we have a lot of brokenness, and you're right. Then you went on to talk about all of the issues with broken commercial systems and all of that. I agree with you on all of that. But I just want to say that it looks like the world is on fire and everyone in B2B is screwed up. It's just that the loudest voices who are the most screwed up are the ones we see in our feeds most often. It doesn't mean every other industry's got it nailed, but the degree of train off the tracks, what I've observed, having worked in and around SaaS for 20 years, they've got it wrong about a lot of things. And let me call out some names for people that watch this if you don't believe me and you think I'm being overly critical. John Miller, co-founder of Marketo and Engagio. John has made it a complete 180 turn since last year in 2024 on LinkedIn, saying basically all of the nonsense, about buyer journeys, linear buying patterns, and you can spam and stalk people into, quote, buying and creating demand. All that stuff is wrong. John has completely turned his stripes in saying, as a Martech tech founder of high influence in the 2000s, we all, a lot of us in that VC go-go era, like, Mad Men and the advertising of 50 years ago, we got it wrong. The truth is, you can't spam and marketing automate your way into forcing people who are not in market to spend money. It's not the way, complex selling works. So there is an admission by some, Adam, I think in fairness, that it's screwed up, right? The problem is they're all looking to false prophets to lead them to the new promised land and how to fix it. And what you see, I'm sure, is a lot of, okay, so that, the glass half full is, that what you've been doing is wrong, but the glass still half full is now the people you're turning to for advice, they're wrong too. So you're going to perpetuate another 10 years of wrongness until you kind of finally wake up and get on the path to better outcomes. And I know that that's what you're passionate about and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I'll just quickly speak to, thank you so much for mentioning Pavilion has done really well at silo enhancement, right? But not revenue alignment architecture.
Yeah.
So I've been speaking about, I don't know how long you've looked at any of my stuff. I've been speaking about this stuff loudly for like 6 years.
Yeah, the past 12 months. Yeah.
Yeah. But we want to solve that problem. And what drew me to initially wanting to have this discussion with yourself, and I'm sure George will substantiate this as well, is you spoke to what we call cataloging the market
right.
in one of the companies.
Yep.
As soon as people actually, as you said, stop looking towards these false prophets and get back to what we do upstream in terms of large contract acquisition, big finance, which is my background, and apply that downstream, you're actually more commercially viable across the funnel. And then you've really just got to build, if that's the first motion and then that goes back to marketing only then needs to build on that timing. And then you're suddenly then in your front of mind for your RFPs, your RFQs, your bids. You're then looking at, you're giving them a buyer journey instead of pushing them through a funnel that they're never going to buy. What's the commercial cost and the lost opportunity cost of processing that way for all of these organizations in terms of bums in seats to just do more dumb shit worse instead of doing better? But yeah, I know George has probably got a question around some of this, but I just wanted to substantiate.
Yeah, you're 100% right, because the dumb shit stuff you're talking about, what Martech has enabled is for 15 years companies to do all the wrong things, but do them more efficiently.
I would love, Steve, if you could go further into that example that you did share with us. I think it was on a LinkedIn comment around the time where you were a CMO at that point in a particular company and you were cataloging.
Yeah, it was my first tech CMO role back in 2011 and 12. And what you and Adam refer to as cataloging, we just really viewed as, if you're going to pursue an account-based selling model with target accounts, by definition, you've got to go beyond just importing a bunch of firmographic and technographic data from a couple of compiled databases, of which they're going to be errant and there's going to be missing data. You actually need to initiate a process, a scalable process around how you can identify the real, in my professional opinion, the real data sets that you need to prioritize your account planning by quarter. So really quickly, the story, my first tech CMO role was in the cloud hosting and infrastructure business, working for a Canadian company that had data centers in Canada, US, the UK, and Europe. I think we had 18 of them at the time. So a couple $100 million in annual turnover. So we were kind of a low to mid-market player competing against the multi-billion-dollar players such as, I mentioned earlier, AWS, Microsoft Azure, $1 to $2 billion US dollar players like Rackspace, and a few others. So we were trying to move up market, the classic move up market, right? Well, so one of the things that because as a former sales guy, I got along very, very well with the senior VP of sales. When we had in an annual planning meeting going into 2012 say, hey, we want to get out of a lot of the SMB type clients. We're going to take some price increases and some other things to clear out about 25% of our data centers. In other words, we're going to deliberately trigger churn to free up data center capacity so we can backfill them with margin-rich, highly sticky, long-term mid-market accounts. We had to orchestrate this very carefully with the CFO, and I am the head of sales report of the CFO. So long story short, what we did is I didn't take the responsibility into marketing because I'm very leery that sales doesn't trust marketing. So if marketing said, we had a conversation with the top 1,000 accounts on your target account list, and we even had recordings of the conversation, sales would somehow say, yeah, but, right, ... Yeah, but you didn't ask this, or yeah, but, I'm not sure about that. So we said, hey, you guys own it from a sales perspective. Let you be the lead actor. We'll be the supporting actor, putting bodies, some technology, building out, some of the capture, the data capture pieces, custom fields in Salesforce. We actually own the admin function in marketing. So we decided on a unified vision. What are the 6 or 8 things at a minimum we think are critical for these target accounts that we must know? So as a subscriber business, one of the first things you want to know is contract renewal date. If somebody's on a 3-year deal they just signed last quarter, they're in market 2.5 years from now. Let's not prioritize them as a hot sales account and throw all these resourcing and marketing air cover thinking we're going to close it between now and the end of the year. So one of the things that contract renewal dates do, obviously, is they not only give you competitive insight into the duration, the length of the contracts your competitors are getting people to sign, potentially the value of those contracts if they're willing to share them, but it can help you by quarter begin to chronologically organize and geographically map the dispersion of target accounts quarter by quarter. Sales is going to go after by country and regional markets to then assess what do we need to do between marketing and sales to prime that pump, get them, in an in-market buyer conversation. And the other fields beyond just, contract renewal date, who their current, cloud hosting vendor was, are they an Azure customer, AWS? If they would tell you, is, Adam, you mentioned it at the top, what do they like most about the current provider? Essentially, why did you pick them? Now, a year, 2, 3 into the relationship, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Yeah. And that's it's a Jeff Ernst from Forrester, question that Jeff and I have used in market research. The old, magic wand, or if you could change one thing, because they may have 5 things that they're not happy about, but if you can really see convergence around 1 or 2 things emerging, we can begin to gear our sales and marketing narratives around how we can help them overcome that, right? So know that. We also wanted to know in their next contract cycle, what are 2 or 3 of the key product or service requirements that they're going to be looking for going forward. Now we have a forward-looking target, and there were a few others that I'd be happy to write a blog post about or whatever for you guys. So here's what we end up with now. So we end up with a pie chart we can create very quickly on competitor market share by geo slice, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year contracts, ACV, service mix. Because we always think we know who our competitors are. And sometimes you're right. In a lot of cases, you're competing against somebody you didn't know you're competing against, including no decision, right? So we could quickly map the competitive set to validate who we think we got to go against. We know what they like that the current incumbent vendor is doing. So what we needed to do, this is now marketing, going back to 4 Ps. If we know what they like and don't like, we have to ask ourselves, do we have the product mix at renewal time to offer them what they like to continue that experience, but also overcome one of the things that they don't like? It could be service white glove onboarding. It could be whatever it is that they said our current vendor basically has dropped the ball. So that's that piece. One of the other things on the forward-looking piece as well, because as a CMO, I own the product roadmap. If we're thinking about, hey, we could put 200 million euros into a data center in central Germany or 200 million euros into Rome, well, I want to look at who says I need more central or southern European, data mirroring. If only somebody had a convenient data center there, I'd give them the 5-year contracts. This can even help your CapEx strategies and your product strategies on multi-year roadmaps. So this was hugely valuable. Pricing, you could imagine all the insights. So it was not just helpful for sales to prioritize by quarter named accounts, but we could go through as marketing and sit with the sales director for that region and say, let's look at how we are in product parity. Let's look at how we are in pricing. Let's look at where our data centers are located there. They said a possible sales objection would be buying from a brand that they know. We're relatively unknown, and they said the Gartner Magic Quadrant report, as an example, is one of the things they rely on to make a vendor decision. We're not on the Gartner Magic Quadrant report, and that's a real story, by the way. So one of the things that I had to do in 2012 is we got to get on the Forrester Wave report, the Gartner Magic Quadrant report. We have to show up in certain hosted infrastructure publications that then we could create enablement assets to make it easy off of Salesforce for the sales guys to immediately put in the hands of the buyer who says, I've never heard of Peer 1 hosting. And that company, I subsequently, all of us, we helped it sell to Cogeco Cable about 10 years ago in Canada. So that brand is no longer around. But even down to sales narratives, enablement assets, what are the things they're likely to ask? They told us, and if we don't have a good answer for, we can get them in the funnel all day. From marketing, they're going to maybe get to a legit opportunity created in the opportunity object, and then they're going to die on the vine from opportunity to close. We're just not going to close the business, because we can't de-risk the buying process for them. We're an unknown brand, or we don't have enough customer, referrals. We would build a holistic kind of support playbook to support account-based selling. Now, I'm going to fast forward real quick, because Equinix, I'll name this, they're a $2 billion hosting company back 10 years ago. They were a competitor. After I left Peer 1, 2 years later, around 2014 or 15, I'm sitting in the San Francisco Bay Area on Oracle Drive, which is where Oracle's headquartered, and Equinix is around the corner. And I remember having a VP of marketing conversation with the head of marketing at the time for Equinix and their agency. And the agency head was a good friend of mine. She asked me to fly out there to help them. And they wanted to launch ABM, account-based marketing, right? Because 10 years ago, that was a big thing. Mm-hmm. The first question I asked the VP of marketing, I said, hey, let me ask you something. Are you guys pursuing account-based selling? Do you have an ABS strategy? Have you seen it? She's like, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. I said, well, let me offer a suggestion without sounding sarcastic. There's no sense in spinning up ABM if your sales leadership is not pursuing account-based selling, because they should be aligned. And if they already have target accounts and they're already going out and doing the insights collection that, Adam, you call cataloging, we just called it account intelligence gathering, right? Mm-hmm. What a disjoint that's going to be if marketing is out spending millions to target these ICP fit, ABM accounts. Sales has got a complete different idea in target accounts to drive account-based selling. That's tragedy number one. Tragedy number two is sales isn't doing account-based selling, and marketing goes and spends millions on account-based marketing, fills CRM with all these high-fit accounts, and sales says these aren't at all what we're looking for. So these types of things, I know I've gone a long time here, but I know, George, you wanted to dive into what you guys are calling cataloging. I wanted to get real specific with how marketing needs to take a supporting actor role, because marketing and or sales enablement, if it's not reporting into marketing, but at least the product marketing function within marketing that supports enablement, the whole job is to be a wingman to the frontline seller or selling team to make selling easier. Close more, close it faster, renew more often, right? Yeah. That's the game we're in. Sell more, close it faster. Yeah.
That's only going to happen if they follow this process, right? What I love about what you said, and what maybe some sellers don't actually realize, is if you lead with this, not only are you more commercially viable, you're building the relationship rapport on the front end, but you're also cancelling out on what the objections are going to be when the time comes for the right timing with marketing. You've got the direct link from the market validation, first party intent, straight to your marketing team for them to be more efficient. But yeah, that's just how we see it. As you can even ask George, initially, I didn't even talk about the pillar one of my closed circuit selling for probably 3 years because I thought it was market obvious and people would steal all my stuff. George convinced me to go flat out and just explain, if you lead with this, it opens up all the marketing unlock, it opens up customer success, it enables you to speak to a wider portion of the buying pyramid, all of these things. But yeah, what I'll just recap on that, because I know George has got a question. I have been doing this since 2001. The first time that I did this, I translated this from a high suiting company called Christopher Cronus Designs, which was the most expensive suiting and shirt company in Australia. A good Greek guy. And Steve will, so George will love that. We just basically just catalogued what their buying cycles were, and then went back to them when Chris was going to make those ranges. Like, it was
Yeah.
real obvious, right?
Yeah.
Years later, I did the same thing at Fitness First as head of business development, and just thought, who could we sell into multiples or sell more of groups of people that needed this, and then just find out who they're with right now and then go back to those groups. So instead of doing their one-to-one referral basis, which is what they teach out of London, we just sold to groups and like employers, and they'd never seen it before. So then 2 years later, I met my mentor, which is a guy named Mark Revel that had worked in the banking and finance industry for 30 years. And we amalgamated these processes and just used this in salary packaging and financial advice, but also on op lease.
Right.
Because if you're going to sell like 110,000 cars on a sale and leaseback, you need to know who they're with and what the margins are. What would it take to change? So all we're really doing is applying how easy this is as the commercial unlock across industry sector, and making it hopefully the next thing where people can actually realize they can be more involved in the process. They can bring marketing on the journey. They can make customer success jobs easy. All of these things stem from that one action. Sorry, George, I know you've got some questions.
No, I guess just to build on that, probably a question back to you, Steve, from what you saw around like gathering this account intelligence, what Adam calls cataloging the market.
Right.
Does that relieve some of the pressure on marketing to stop being a pure lead generation function? Because I feel like a reason we're pushed to be a lead gen function is, of course, like the SDR AE split out, but it all comes back to this feeling of wanting to control the buy journey, wanting to know who is in market versus who is out of market. And because if sales aren't collecting this information, then who is? And then it's all of a sudden being forced on marketing to guess who's in and out of market. And that's just something we're not equipped to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on 2 or 3 really good things there, and there was a really good article, and it's one of 2 articles. I don't want to misname which one it is. I think it's one John Lombardo wrote that was published about 2 years ago, and it said, in the same way that great investors don't try to time the market, great sellers don't try to time the customer. Of this whole idea of, we're going to amalgamate all these signals and we're going to make tons of assumptions about when they're in market. And we're going to try to micro time the delivery of, pixel targeted ads, and we're going to personalize down to a picture with them and their dog. We know it's a retriever and blah blah. All of this, to me, just wasted energy. You're right. I always say that guessing is expensive and guessing gets people fired. So I don't like to guess on where I'm placing marketing bets. And one of the things about reporting to a CFO when I was in the CMO role is you can imagine a lot of scrutiny on any time you're in a quarterly review, or I'm with the board up in Vancouver, Canada, every November for the coming year, and you're saying we're going to spend $9 million US on marketing, or $12 million US or whatever. The obvious questions coming from the board or the other C-suite peers of mine are, well, how do we know, these accounts will be in market in the next 6 to 9 months? How do we know? There's a lot of, you could fill in the blank. How do we know that we need to maybe double down on another Central European data center and put it there versus put it in South America from a CapEx with a 20-year recovery window, whatever? It removes a lot of the guesswork. And so we can say, well, great question. So let me tell you how we know, not with absolute certainty, but with fairly high directional certainty. It is true. People, you could talk to 500 accounts and they could lie to you categorically. But assuming these people are giving you, relatively truthful answers, we know these things because we're taking the time to get it firsthand. We're not relying on inferential signals and, $400,000 in Martech stack. The other thing it allowed me to do is turn in the room to the head of sales when they would say to him, his name was Jay, are you on board with this? And have him say, we're absolutely aligned in the accounts, and my team led the insight discovery. So yeah, we're 100% aligned on who we're going to go after, account plans that cascade off of that by sales director regions. we've got a hit list from marketing of exactly what we need and getting on 2 analyst reports. We're going to do, and we did some things like doing a 10 to 20 city tour in the US and 5 in the UK where we hosted CIOs, and it was a half-day golden ticket, and 80 influential, accounts got invited, and we created a real experience and actually changed the way we were doing the classic trade show and event nonsense that would never bring together in the room these target accounts. You guys know, you go to, I was going to Comdex in the late 1980s in Las Vegas, the first big global tech show, right? And CeBIT in Germany. And the truth is, you're running around, with a beer in the hand and running booth to booth, and you're trying to get the VP or whatever, who's one of your target decision makers, and you thought you had a meeting, and they look at the watch, and the assistant says, "Oh, they're flying back to the HQ a day early," and it's all the smoke screen, and you're fighting for 4 minutes of attention span, and nobody buys at a trade show. They're there for other reasons. It's just, and you come back, you spend $200,000 on that, and I thought, well, what if I could create 10 $20,000 micro events that's not trying to hit 100 of your prospecting accounts. It's 8 intimate settings. It's not a setup for a sales pitch, and we'll go into another time some of the ideas on how we did it. But when you have relative clarity on the target accounts, exactly where they are in the buying cycle. For instance, George, if I know you're not in market for 2 years and you and I are together in a VIP club at Heathrow or in Sydney, I'm not hitting you up to talk about buying next quarter. I mean, it just takes all of those silly, awkward conversations off the table. And instead, maybe we're on a golf foursome, we get paired up. You knew earlier I'm not a golfer, so whatever. We'll use another example, but you can have more informed conversations. You can have more informed conversations. And I agree with the point you made earlier that the reason marketers are grasping at straws, Adam said it at the top, the goal is leads, whatever you classify a lead to be. If they have a pulse and a purchase order, you shove them over to sales. But you have a KPI that's wrong. You have an incentive system built on the wrong KPI. Even though you can tell an executive team, do you know that only 20% of your quote MQLs convert to a sales accepted lead? So if you send 500 to sales, 400 are bullshit and you're wasting their time, they feel better with the activity of sending them 500 to net the 100. And then the sales guys claim, well, I don't have time to prepare for the sales call and go really in depth and all that because I'm filtering through so much junk that the SDRs send me. I'm all about, why not just send them the 100 that we think are truly in market with a high propensity to buy, where we have really good ICP fit, but I'm going to throw another term out to you. And we represent high IVP fit. Ideal vendor profile. So let's park the bus here for 60 seconds and talk about this. Marketing and sales teams uniformly get seduced by the dream list of accounts they want to work with, right? And we can come up with whatever those are. The reality is not every vendor is going to be perceived as ideal when you're sitting on the buyer side of the table. Too small, not enough experience in, when we were in cloud infrastructure, it was, tell me about your big multi-data center, high complexity workloads that you do, or geophysical simulation, or market trading simulation. Do you have, GPU servers that can do, types of stuff? So when you come up with your target lists, Adam, I don't know what your thoughts are. I want to let you comment on this. I think you've got to go through those some intelligence around, they may be our dream target list, but there should be a filter around, do we think we have a reasonable chance from a sales accessibility of closing them? Because they buy the way we like to sell, direct, indirect, through channels and partners, whatever. We can largely answer all the questions they're going to ask about years in business, blue chip clients, similar use cases on product and service deployment, contract flexibility, opt-outs in year one if we fail to deliver, right? So if your legal department will never give you that contract and they like to buy through systems integrators and tech consultants, but you only sell direct, and you have all these mismatches, those are huge flags that you're going to greatly complicate your sales process, and your likelihood of closing that business is pretty low. So what we would do with those accounts where we quote cataloged them, and then we dug in and found out they are dream accounts, but we don't sell the way they like to buy, or we don't have the products they need, we parked them and tagged them with what the gaps were that we needed to close, and then would rotate them into the forefront every 3 to 6 months based on when we close those gaps. We bring them back into the prospect pool. because now we're ready for prime time to send our best sales guys in, armed with a higher, potential to close the business. Thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say that that's the swings and roundabouts of what you'll learn is just a different tilt on the catalog, right? So, Steve, how could we be better for next time? Because we know that we don't have this, this, and this right now. Could you help me and my team just so that we can be better for next time? Then all of that bucket then becomes your research, which is still first party intent, which might be what you build out 12, 18 months. That's equally as important as finding out who you can be commercially efficient to win right now, because that's showing you the roadmap of where you want to get to. That's you're internally getting yourself to the dream state, which is using an old marketing term.
Yeah.
But yeah, 100%. But they won't do it. The market can't see the difference between the tilt of the two catalogs. Like they're so fixated on selling the meeting, they're actually missing speaking to a wider percentage of the market. If you're only serving to try to get to the 3%, what about the 20% under that where you could actually be getting this intelligence and building out what's going to make you the industry leader? You're actually missing the whole point. But yeah, we've hopefully between some of these discussions, we can unify and help get the market back there.
Well, George, you brought something up that it just occurred to me that before we move on to the next question you want to ask, you talked about marketers and the inefficiency and how have marketers been forced into being lead gen machines, right? So we talked a little bit about that. But, I think that one of the other things that's missing here is, and I think about this in sales, and Adam, I know, you've led sales teams. So if you've got to make end of quarter end of year numbers, I always think of the sales process as a horizontal sequence, right? And marketing views the world moving left to right. Somebody that downloads or subscribes to an email, attends a podcast, whatever, then they use enough scoring and intent signals. Maybe they're a lead. They kick them over to sales. Sales doesn't consider them a lead. They recycle. But eventually you're moving left to right, at least in the West, right? We read left to right. So you think about a sales pipe. That's where the pipeline obviously comes from. But sales views the world right to left. If I got to make numbers, I'm going to stalled opportunities or things that are 75% down the process because I don't have time for marketing to give me, even right now, we're doing this in the month of July, right? If you've got a 9 to 12 month highly complex considered sale, if marketing gave you 300 new leads in August, unless they were going to greatly compress their buying cycle to 90 days because they have end of year money they need to spend to re-platform or whatever, it's never going to happen. So what do you do? If I'm a frontline seller and I'm 200,000 euros short of quota, I'm looking at right to left. And so what happens is when marketing spends a ton of money on junk in the lead and into the opportunity stage, that we know collectively, if you're doing this commercially the right way, sales says, our normal close rate's 23 to 25% at opportunity to close. But given the things that these customers want that we don't have in terms of product mix, flexible contract terms, first year opt-out clauses, we're probably a 10% chance of closing that piece of business. Then I would ask, why did we ever spend marketing money to put them in the funnel in the first place? So George, back to your point, it's not only a problem to send leads to sales that sales puts their hand up and says, these people don't have any buying intent. They could have a legit buying intent, so they get to opportunity stage. So on the surface, the first 40 minutes of our call 40 minutes ago, we said, why don't we comp people on opportunities? Okay, fine. So let's assume you fix the first part of the funnel, commercial integration, your GTM and RevOps, that there's a unified idea what an ideal customer looks like. There's a unification between sales and marketing around, we're not going to guess at intent, we're going to look for buyer declared signals. Sales, we usher it to sales. But if this is not the type of opportunity for which we are an IVP, an ideal vendor for them to buy from, you're going to see now what? You've spent all this money in marketing, but it gets worse because now you've got sales wasted time. The SDR, the AE, the sales director that got called in because it's a whale deal. Over 500,000 euros or Australian dollars or whatever. Now you got a director. And then you know all this, the collateral stuff that comes with it. Now you start to look at CAC payback. You look at some of your expense ratios for actual closed revenue. And it's actually not a lead opportunity problem. It's a company that we were a year too early bringing them into our sales funnel. The truth is, we'd be in a way better position in 2026 to go after the business, because you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And if you look at what Kerry Cunningham and a lot of the folks at Sixth Sense, Forrester have been writing about the last 60, 90 days, based on research that's been conducted by a variety of people over the last 3 to 5 years, with the whole, 90% or so of all buyers start with a day one shortlist consideration set, right? Some of the things that I've seen the last 2 weeks is about how buyers don't start, most buyers don't start at some top of a funnel, right? They've got experience buying the category. They come into the purchase decision with already prior brand experiences with AWS or Azure or whatever. So in our case, imagine the scenario where you bring a lead into opportunity. We're not really a good fit. We don't win the business. We do what Adam said, ask in kind of the post, conversation. What could we have learned from this? How could we come back a year from now to win the business? A year from now, we come back, and guess what? The champion that was on that buying group has moved to another company. New buying group champion there. And you know what the new buying group champion hears from the peers on the buying group? Oh yeah, we looked at Adam's company last year. They weren't a good fit. So guess what they do? All right, we're going to rule them out. Adam's sales team never gets the second chance to say, now we have our act together. Now we have the contracts and the product mix and all the things. So you see how that plays out? Once you strike out, you're kind of yesterday's news, unless you were down to the final two and it was a close call. But that's what I worry about, that I don't even think it's talked about much at all, is bringing accounts into the funnel too early relative to the vendor's ability to realistically close and service. You can close it and they can get out in 90 days or whatever if you F up the deployment, right? So close it, service it to set up renewal.
George?
Oh, I was just going to build on that, Steve, and share that in one of our programs, Adam finally convinced a revenue leader to go out there and do what he says is cataloging. And he came back with these findings and realized that just for one account in particular, for example, they'd been chasing this one account, spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to chase this one individual account. And they found out from the catalog that the specific features that they actually needed, their competitors served far better. What they needed was never going to be on their product roadmap. But if they actually hadn't done this cataloging work and they eventually pulled a meeting in, yeah, and the salesperson probably would have pushed through the deal anyway because it was a big deal, and then it would have just been a disaster at customer success. Their reputation's burned. They're never going to come back again. And
think about the hours that salesperson could have been investing in accounts that would have closed. Maybe a slightly lower value, but they're enamored and they love your service. You grow when they grow. They refer 3 other people, and they're one of your, customer referral list, folks that you can call. So 100%, George, really good illustration there. And that happens a lot. And I'll tell you what, the other thing I think that's problematic is if you've got relatively, inexperienced salespeople, 2 to 5 years, that can kill their confidence. That can really, because they see their peers closing. I remember my first job out of college in that 100% commission role I told you when I was 23 years old with no draw. We had 8 guys on a sales leaderboard, and me and a buddy of mine, John, were always number 1 or number 2, and it was like a big competitive. We were friends, but it was so big. If you're number 2 that month, it's like, oh, you're the first loser. Hey, way to go, man. We'll see you next month at the top, right? And so we had a lot of fun with that. But imagine the guy that's consistently, or the woman that's 7th, 8th, or 9th. You may get out of the sales profession. You may be convinced, I can't do this. You may get sacked, all because you don't know how to rightly qualify and prioritize where you spend your time. And part of it's not your fault, because your organization is essentially saying, if marketing kicks the lead over, you've got to pursue it, regardless of fit or potential to close.
Interesting to just close out on that topic, how you said about some accounts, you'll lose the account if they've changed their buying committee, right, over time, but you might be the right fit in 12 months' time. What also doing these market validations or cataloging up front will allow you to do is act as an account manager for an account you don't yet have. That's Absolutely. The second component of that market validation. If you're not keeping in constant contact with those companies, that's exactly what will happen, right? But while all the business development teams are measured on meetings, They, one, can't do market validations, they can't do the catalogs, and they can't act as an account manager for the accounts they don't yet have, but they would have got if they're allowed to act in this way from the start. So it's actually twofold. Like the cataloging, George, will get you timing, offer, channel, right person, buying committee. But the second component of that for the ones that are like in the toast on the fire for later is acting as an account manager for the accounts you don't yet have. They have to have that allowance to be able to do that. Otherwise, they're going to miss the ones they would have got in the perfect amount of timing, even if that's a prolonged amount of timing.
Adam, that's a really good point. And I have a quick, this will be fast, I promise, not the 7 or 8 minute thing I gave you earlier, because I was going through, you were like, hey, dive into how all this worked.
Yeah.
So to your point, not only is that a good idea, but one of the things that I asked in this first CMO role, right? A unique question probably come from the marketing guy, but I was first a sales guy, right? Before I went into marketing. Mm-hmm. I said, hey, and I sat on every win-loss weekly meeting, and I made my demand directors, Marcom directors, all this sit in on it. So for the reasons I said before, because if we're losing deals for things that are under the 4 Ps, it's on us to go fix those to better equip the sales guys. So I would ask, the head of sales, I'd say, hey, so when we do win-loss and we had some real high ICP fit, dream accounts that we lost, and we know why, they gave us the detail. What do we do then? And they said, well, if they've signed a 2-year deal with a competitor and all that, we're going to come back in about 18 months and start following up with them, back to the cataloging, right, and the timing. Mm-hmm. I said, well, hold on a minute. Because I was running marketing, and that included product marketing, and that meant analyst relations, and that meant weekly calls with IDC, Forrester, Gartner, and a whole lot of others. I set up some analyst calls and said, hey, based on what you know, and in that cloud hosting and infrastructure sector, this is me talking to the analysts. I said, do you have any sense of what percentage of deals that get awarded to the vendor A on the list go south during rollout and deployment such that the customer might be open to exercising an exit clause and going with the second choice? And I forget what the number is. So this may be wrong, but I think it was somewhere around 15%. So 1 out of 7. So I went back to our head of sales. I said, Jay, hey, look, if we're processing $500 million in annual pipeline through, of which we're closing 23% to get roughly around 200 million in gross revenue, and a seventh of that, or about 35 million, is revenue we might be able to capture after we've been told you made final 2, but we didn't go with you, simply by staying in touch over the first 90 days with that account. After they've said we're going to go with Rackspace or AWS, what do you think about we pilot this with 1 or 2 of your better reps, where they're not doing this for all the accounts, just theirs. They're lost. Their close lost. We, marketing, and you would sign off, orchestrate how they would follow up. The cadence, we're not selling anything, the legitimate handwritten note that gets mailed, the legitimate just sharing a best practice document on rollout and deployment of replatforming. No sales, no offers. It doesn't go to my marketing team where they end up in some damn drip campaign. Mm-hmm. Honest, sincere follow-up, white glove follow-up to show that even if we don't win the deal, we're classy even when losing, and we're the kind of company you want to do business with. Adam, we actually had, as you would expect, I'm sharing the story, because if it didn't work, I wouldn't be sharing it, right? But we had defection scenarios where we could go to close lost, reactivate it as an opportunity, back into the pipeline, assigned to the same rep who did the warming to show them the white glove service, and could then run that through, but it's already at the end of the pipeline. Why? It's fully scoped, fully quoted, the whole thing. We're not starting from the beginning with a 4-month, hey, Adam, tell me about what keeps you up at night. Hey, so those types of behaviors that you're talking about are freaking awesome, because it's found money. But know what? These companies, when I talk to their sales leaders, I say, what do you guys do with closed lost? Oh, we blow them off. We can't have our sales guys focusing on that stuff. We already gave it our best shot. We lost. So maybe a year from now, if we're short on marketing leads, we'll go back in and try to mine that list. And I'm thinking, they're people, man. They're people. They are going with another vendor who are going to promise the promised land. But a lot of times the sales bullshit that comes with sales pitches and proposals, operationally, they may screw this up. Don't you want to be there as kind of the guy in waiting to say, hey, man, we're still taking the high road, would still love to do business with you? That's okay. I understand we were second best, but we want to show you that we're actually first best. I don't
So
see that built into our workflows
yeah.
at all.
What I love about that is you've just itemized pillar 2 and 3 of closed circuit selling. We set up a presentation day where we do live quoting and we
Mhm.
do an introduction to the account management or the CSM team from the room. And then we go around and we show them what it's going to be like to work with us. From there, we roll out what a serviceability plan in terms of communication would look like. They're already in contact with their key account management team, whether we win or lose the deal.
Yeah,
And then
that's
they
another great best
consistently they
practice.
say,
Yeah.
so this is what all of these LinkedIn AE or people that were sales op that have turned GTM engineer, they don't understand what I'm talking about because
No.
they've never actually run that process. So they're actually missing everything you've just said. That's actually why, and people have grilled me over this. That's pillar 2 and 3, George, I believe. And in our mini series, it's 3 and 4 of why we do that. That's the whole
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. Well, when I was running my own marketing agency for 14 years, it was really a consulting firm that, George, I mentioned grew from 0 to 20 million in 3 years, right? A big part of how we sold against agencies is I'm like, I hate to disappoint you, but I haven't built a company based on really cute girls 3 years out of college and $20,000 cappuccino machines in the lobby. Now, it was true that 2/3 of our employees were female, but I hired them based on brains,
Mm.
looks, right? And so it's about respecting this. For the third of the guys on the team, right? Everybody had 10 years minimum experience in the industry in which they're working in. So if you're working in automotive, you're working in tech, minimum 10 years, you had to have held a director level role. In other words, they've walked in the shoes of the people we're selling to. And when we would go in and sell the team, to your point, Adam, the salesperson would go in and this is the people you're working with, and we'd say, check their LinkedIn profiles. It's not a lightweight liberal arts degree, and somebody was a graphic designer turned armchair marketer or sales enablement person. And you guys have both talked about that throughout the hour we've been here together. We've talked about marketers that have never carried a sales bag, yet they're trying to tell sales what a qualified lead looks like via an MQL. It's blows my mind. It's salespeople that don't go out and in their lead. It starts with leadership. Don't want to spend the time to rightly align in market accounts where you have a high chance of winning, and they'd rather just have their people spinning their wheels on junk leads from marketing. And all these things, it's all imposters. And then the GTM engineer thing. Every time I see a GTM engineering post, Bain and Company has got a brilliant 4-pillar single infographic. I'll share it with you guys about what real GTM is. And real go-to-market is not leads into a pipeline for revenue. It's everything from brand to operational delivery, IT and technical capabilities, post-sale delivery and support and service, feeding customer feedback loops into multi-year strategic planning. Go-to-market is literally all of the activities to bring a product or service to market, to sell it for a profit so that you're a going concern over the long term. What we have, I hate to say it, a lot of them are under 30, 5 years out of school. They've learned how to push some buttons and pull some levers on a few, tools. And guess what? They're telling the world at 27 years old, having never sold anything, never been a CMO, never been a CRO, never, this is how GTM works. I'm like, really? If I need a knee surgery tomorrow, I'm going to go to a doctor who's actually cut skin. So, but magically, people read this stuff, they buy into this stuff, they hire these people, and they end up with the broken systems that Adam, you've talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds easy, right? What they put there, like they just pretend there's an easy button that you can push, and people are always looking for technology to solve, hard problems, but very often it just gets in the way. Steve, something that Adam kind of talks about when it comes to account intelligence gathering or cataloging or market validation, whatever you want to call it. And as we've identified in this conversation, that is such a huge unlock for your whole team. But Adam sees that the reason you can't do it or teams can't do it, sales teams can't do it, is because of the way they're measured. And often because now they're measured on meetings booked, they're kind of treating every conversation they have as if someone is in market ready to buy right now. And if they're not, too bad, got to go to the next one because I'm measured on meetings booked. Are you seeing the same thing? Like, I'm wondering why, because you have seen firsthand and executed this a number of times. Why aren't other teams able to do this? Why isn't it happening?
Yeah, I mean, the answers are going to, I think, be pretty obvious, but I'll validate what I think you already know. So you asked two questions. Am I seeing the same, and why aren't companies doing it? So I'm seeing it in venture and PE-backed tech firms, primarily SaaS. That's where 80% of the money goes. Again, why? Well, because when investors put money in, they want money out, usually on a 5-year horizon. So if I were putting $1 million of my own money into a startup, I wouldn't be worried about building a legacy brand, because you're going to get acquired and your brand's probably going to go away, and it's going to be your book of accounts and a few of the smartest salespeople, all that get absorbed by the acquirer. So the first thing is they're not interested in that. Building commercial systems, quote, the right way. If your company's going to be gone in 5 years or 6 years, you're going to be using the commercial systems whoever buys you. So why go spend up a lot of money paying McKinsey or whomever to come in and build some world-class commercial system? Because the whole point of this thing is to blow it up and sell it in 60 months. So it's going to be gone. So that's why every action is viewed through the lens of, can it get us sales this quarter or next quarter? And when you have a quarter plus one lens, this is why salespeople are like, if I'm, right now in July in Q3, if your, calendar and fiscal are aligned, if I can't close you by the end of 2025, I don't want to talk to you. So that's the first causal set of dominoes. When you take VC and PE money with and the founders largely overcommit on super loose TAM and BS assumptions about how buyers right, we've talked about for an hour. So they've put themselves on the hook for a number. Then they realize after the hangover wears off, from posting, oh, look at our Series C raise and all that. Okay, so you raised a bunch of money. Guess what? You've got a gun to the head now, and they'll take your company and your board seats if you don't deliver. Why is that something to celebrate? You know what I used to celebrate? I paid myself an extra $1 million this year on a personal distribution because I sold a lot of shit. That's something to post about, right? Not you raised money, but I digress. So the first problem is short time frame investments, over commitments. Everybody has got to be in the act of selling right now. So there's the first thing. So am I seeing other companies in legacy industries, industrial manufacturing and robotics, fintech, biotech, other, who are building companies for the long haul, who have long, protracted, highly complex sales cycles, that understand just because a guy's not buying today, if they've called you back and you've begun to build rapport, and you can build a know, like, and trust relationship with them for when they're ready to buy, you don't kick them to the curb. You balance the here and now with next year. And the analogy I use all the time that's the easiest is farming. Imagine farmers that only went out for fall crops in the next 90 days and harvested, and they did no replanting for winter or spring next year. It's like Who Moved My Cheese, right? The book. You're going to go out to the fields and say, oh no, there's nothing coming out of the ground. Well, you didn't plant for the future. And that goes for both sales and marketing. So the failure to understand that is problematic. So why don't companies do it? So the answer to the first question is, it's really bad in tech and SaaS. There are other industries that are building long-term companies. They hire in more mature management, what I call professional management, people with real experience, and they're building a scalable company that outlives them. CEOs retire, the next CEO comes in, the brand continues, right? Think about Apple. Steve Jobs is gone, right? And now we've got, the continuation, and there will come a time when that executive team is, Tim Cook and these guys don't want to run Apple anymore. So then the next CEO comes in. But when you're building something that outlives you as a founder team or executive team, you're building for the long term. So that's why it's not happening. What's stopping them? It's just shifting the perspective. It's just shifting the perspective to realize the fairly obvious things, like the farming analogy, the fairly obvious things backing up to everything Adam has said, that look, we can't force people to buy, let's say 3 months ago, and there are concerns about global tariffs. We can't force people to buy, no matter how clever our marketing is, how polished our deck is in the sales team. If they don't have C-level buy-in, that something's going to come out of the budget and something else gets slotted in. So you got to make the case for change. And we all know why you, why this, why now. You got to make the case for change. And when there's not an appetite to make change and there's not executive support for the budgets and all that, it doesn't matter how clever you are, you're not going to force it. So I learned early on in sales, because I'm a pretty impatient guy, of how it goes when you press somebody to try to get them to buy on your timeline and not theirs. Yeah. So we've all been there, right? And it's F off. I don't want to talk to you. Don't ever email me again. And I'm like, wow, okay,
Mm.
so that didn't work. I guess I don't have as much control as I thought. Now, yes, there are things that good sellers can do to try to influence the timing. But in general, I think, George, the answer that I look at is they're not doing it because of either environmental factors, like they're in these VC funded companies. They're not doing it because they're not experienced professional management who have seen it modeled elsewhere. They're not doing it because the CEO doesn't believe in it. They're not doing it because the board isn't convinced. So to change it, just like as a marketer, when I wear that hat, not my sales hat, I have a lot of C-suite education and board education to go in and explain that a CMO is not just the head of promotional activity, one of the four Ps. I have to explain to them the four Ps. I think effective heads of sales or CROs have to explain, if you want me to build a team that's focused on current quarter plus one, and we don't talk to anybody that has legitimate buying interest in doing business with us, but it's out 2 or 3 or 4 quarters, we have a fundamental hamster wheel culture, and the very best salespeople won't stay. We're going to be really good at a lot of activity without meaningful progress. We're never really going to learn how to, quote, go up market and sell to highly sophisticated enterprise buyers, because they don't put up with that nonsense. All the things that hurt growth, top salespeople learning how to sell high value deals, building acumen, building scalable process, and remember, building the company that outlives the management team. You can't do any of that with the current quarter plus one mindset.
Yeah. So the short answer is we change the measurements upstream somehow, and all of this becomes less fugazi.
Well, you have to change the mindset to get them to agree to change the measurement.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so I had a really smart guy, a PA who has helped some of the biggest brands in the world when I was building my, high growth $20 million consulting business. This guy, Dr. Ross Stewart, came into my office one day and he drew a pyramid on my whiteboard, and the pyramid had 2 divider lines. So you had 3 strata layers. It kind of looks like a Maslow's pyramid, but it's not that. Okay, if I recall, Maslow's has 5. So what Ross said is, Steve, when you hire people or you want to create culture, what most people try to do is they create incentive and disincentive systems to motivate certain types of actions. So he said in the top of the pyramid, the smallest area, we're going to write actions. But the truth is, you can bribe people with bonuses or put them on double, triple secret write up or sack them, but you really don't make lasting change to behavior unless you change their values, what they value. So he writes in the second middle area, values. So for instance, he says, you value honesty, attention to detail, urgency, thoroughness, going above and beyond for the customer, treating people the way you want to be treated. This is all a value layer of what you value. So when you hire people, you can't hire people expecting to instill that. They already have to have it. And when they value those things, their actions, like thoroughness of reporting, staying after 6 o'clock at night to help a customer on the phone, whatever it is, their behaviors will follow their values. I said, all right, Ross, what goes in the bottom? He said, beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Your belief set drives your values, and your values drive your actions. He said, so what I'm going to show you how to do, fully legal, you can't ask somebody their religious faith belief or whatever, but he said, I'm going to show you how to interview to get at what people believe, what they value, and it will be a predictor of how they show up and act. And he said, and of particular interest is when you're hiring salespeople. Because if money is not the first or at lowest second motivator, you have a farmer, not a hunter. There may be account management roles for them because they just want to help people and all that, but they need to be self-motivated and intrinsically value financial compensation and reward, because sales is a high stress, high risk business on a high wire. So if they want comfortable, they're always going to be your bottom quartile sales guy that, you're going to try to coach them up before you coach them out and all that. So he said, we'll start with sales, but we'll model this for key roles in the organization. Now, the reason I bring this up is back to what George asked. Well, how do we change it? And you said, well, you just got to change the metrics. Well, yeah, that's a behavior. We got to measure different things. I would argue we have to get them to value different things. And that's anchored in what they believe about how buyers buy, how the market really works. Now, I've tried preaching this to a lot of C-suite. When I go into new jobs or consulting jobs, and they're, they nod in the room because they don't want to insult you, that, oh yeah, that sounds great, we believe you. But deep down you can see, you're like, no, they don't. So what I do first week on the job, whether it's a consultant or a full-time employee, I will typically go to the sales team and I'll say, hey, let's go. I want to go talk to, and I want to ask like 3 questions to 20 of our ICPs. I want you to tee it up. You can be on the call if you want. It's not going to be heavy market research or anything, but I ask them, and it's 3 questions I typically ask that get into how they buy, who they trust, and kind of some dynamics and what puts winning vendors over the top and what they look for. In other words, turnoffs in the sales process, whatever. And it might be 10 to 15 minutes. So I grab these. I create a 2 to 3 minute sizzle reel, and I'll pick the 10 best out of the 20. And then if I'm doing 3 minutes, right, so I have 180 seconds, and I got 10 of them, I got 18 to 20 second sound bites. So I'll have whoever in my team is my audio video person put the thing together. I'll do a lower third on it with who it was, a VP or whatever, and they'll see the brands, because when I do this, CEO's like, oh, that's one of our best customers. CFO, oh, that's one of our longtime customers. In their own words, saying like, here's what I don't want to see from a marketer in this category or this type of vendor. Here's how I buy. Here's how salespeople need to show up. Da 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 da. I don't have to say anything. It's a mic drop moment. So then I say this, George. Let's say I work for you as CEO. I say, George. So, what do you want to do with this information now? So, do we want to sell the way your best customers want to buy? Or are we just going to trample over them and do the shit we've been doing for years? What do you want to do? Because I can structure the marketing team to go both ways. We can spam them, we can kill them, we can pepper them. I can just give sales a bunch of junk leads. Or why don't we start with the customer and engineer backwards a unified commercial system that removes friction, increases buyer confidence in choosing us, can be repeatably delivered, and generates attractive profit margins. How does that sound? Now, only an out of their mind CFO or CEO would say, oh, Steve, that's horrible. Let's not do that. Let's be hugely inefficient and all that. But here's the thing, they kind of back themselves into the corner. And is it manipulative? I don't know. Maybe. I call it influence, because what I'm trying to get them to see is you don't spend time in the trenches, so your beliefs are wrong. Therefore, you value, Adam, things like activity.
Yeah.
I need 100 meetings a week or whatever. That's what we're going to value. So the action, the behaviors, we need to measure those things that we value. I don't think you can change it from the top down. I think you have to change it from the bottom up, because the proof is when you change what they believe and what they value at an executive level, you don't have to keep reselling them the first of every month, 12 months a year on why you're doing it the way you're doing it. Where they walk in like, why don't we have more meetings? Wait a minute. What do we say about meetings? Oh yeah, that's right. That's not the KPI we're going to lead with.
Yeah.
And you have to detox them like a 12-step program. I mean, you have to fundamentally change their belief and value sets to then say, so let's introduce these other behaviors that we really want to institutionalize. And then finally, George, we write the job descriptions and build incentive systems that salespeople can call a closed lost account and spend 10 minutes once every 3 weeks staying in touch. Marketing can actually talk to some of the best customers to figure out if they're even bothering to listen to any of the podcast episodes, whatever. But until we change the belief and value layers, we don't get the freedom to re-engineer the organization, re-engineer the job descriptions and compensation systems. And I think trying to do it from the top down, we're all bloody knuckled and tired. I know I am. 38 years of doing this, I'm tired.
Yeah. Well, it definitely sounds like it all stems back to first party intent and the roadmap to get there. So yeah,
Well,
everything
and
you
to
said.
that point, it's like this. Do you think, if I'm asking you, Adam, as CEO, do you think you can consistently and accurately predict buying intent when never talking to anyone? So if that belief is I can do it, then they're going to do signals and apply lead scores. They have to change the belief. Well, no, I'm not a freaking mind reader. Awesome. So that's what I wanted. Okay, job done. So if we're not mind readers, because I'm not either, you're not, you just said it. What do you think would be the best source of intel to go find out if somebody's in market or when they might be in market? Well, damn it, we'd have to go talk to the customer, the buyer in this case, if they're not a customer. Yes, okay. And it's baby steps. It's what we call Fisher Price style, moving them along. But I mean, literally, I'm role playing this and being sarcastic, but kind of not. We have to go to some of the basic assumptions, like, can we predict shit and get inside the heads of 9 people on a buying committee accurately and repeatably? I can't do it. Maybe you guys can.
I think that's a good place for us to close things off, Steve. You've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate all your insights and sharing your wealth of experience.
Do it again, fellas. We didn't get to trust loops. We didn't get to agency growth strategy. We got stuff for episode 2.
We do. No, we absolutely need to have an episode 2, but I want to let you get to the Tour de France. I know there's something you need to get to. So we're absolutely going to have a part 2. Adam, I told you you were going to love Steve. Steve, Patti, thank you so much for joining us. We'll, of course, link to you in the article that will complement this episode as well. We'll make sure people check you out on LinkedIn as well. Steve shares a lot, fantastic resources, thought, and if you're stuck in the LinkedIn bubble, Steve is one to follow to get some common sense. Thank you so much, Steve.
I appreciate the kind words. Yeah. And Adam, you were at this 10 years earlier than me, 2011 versus 2001. So hats off to you, mate.
It's really good lighting, but George likes to let people know I'm a bit older than maybe I look.
That's okay. That's why I threw the 38 out there, man. I own the brand.
Fantastic.
I own it, man. I own it. But I started my day with a 50-kilometer bike ride, and I ride about 150 to 175K a week.
Yeah. Wow.
Unreal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So,
all right, anyway. Steve, thank you very much. Adam, thank you as always. Appreciate it.